My name is Joe Kissell. As you heard, I am an author and also a publisher. And today I have been asked to talk about password managers, which I'm going to do. And I want to give you a little bit of background information before we get into the specifics of using password manager. And I think you will find it interesting and educational. So here we go. We all know that basically passwords are a real pain. Every place you go online, you are constantly asked to create new passwords and enter passwords. You need passwords for Wi-Fi, you need passwords for email accounts, you need passwords for your bank, for every place. And it's really quite annoying. We all wish that there were a better way that we could all keep our stuff safe and be able to identify ourselves online, all the places we need to go, without using passwords. But for now, for the foreseeable future, even though there are some alternatives gradually taking hold, we are pretty much stuck with passwords. Now, when you are constantly being asked to come up with new passwords and enter those passwords, it's really tempting to take the easy way out. It's really tempting to do something like, oh, well, I'm just going to type the word password, or I'm going to type the name of my cat, or I'm going to come up with one password that I use every place I'm asked for the password. That's an easy way. But there are some problems with taking the easy way out, which I will be talking about in a minute. What I want you to know is that there is an easy way to deal with all of your passwords, to avoid all that hassle and frustration and pain. But it may not be the easy way that you have come up with on your own. So, as I have been researching the ways in which people attempt to keep their stuff safe, the ways in which people use passwords, and the different ways that technology companies have come up with for us to deal with our password problem, I've encountered three big mistakes. And those are what we're going to be talking about today. This is kind of what this presentation is structured around. So the first mistake that a lot of people make is choosing guessable passwords. And by guessable, I mean not just passwords that other people might guess, but also passwords that a computer might guess. And I'll explain exactly what that means in a moment. You don't want to make that mistake. The other mistake you don't want to make, and I already mentioned this, we'll talk more about it in a moment, is reusing the same password in more than one place. Even if you have a terrific password that no one would ever guess, using that password in more than one place puts your data at risk. So you don't want to do that either. But there's another mistake that people make, which is assuming I have to choose either security, which is going to be a real hassle for me, or convenience, which means I sacrifice security. But you don't have to make that choice. There are ways to get both, and we're going to talk about those when we get there. So I want to first talk about this topic of guessability, because you know, you go to some website and they ask you to come up with a password, and the assumption there is that whatever password you choose will be something that nobody else can guess. If somebody else knows your password, it's not really a password at all. You might as well just sign in with your name. So I wanted to just share with you, there's a company that actually makes a password manager that every year they look over lists of passwords. I mean, millions and millions of passwords that have been leaked in some sort of a data breach. And once a company's list of passwords has been made public, this company sifts through them all, and they make a list of the most commonly used passwords that have shown up in these data breaches. So here are the top 25 worst passwords of last year. Now, if you happen to see a password that you use on this list, that's a real danger sign. A password on this list means it is one of the worst passwords in the entire world. No one should ever use this password. Now, if you don't see any of your passwords on this list, that does not by any means mean that you are safe. Even if your password is the millionth most common password, that does not necessarily mean you are safe at all. But I wanted to point out these in particular because they are so common, and even, you know, people I know who are technically proficient and who even work in the tech industry, I know that some of them use passwords like these, and I find that really upsetting and frustrating. So these are things that you should definitely avoid. So obviously those, and again, not just those 25, but a very, very long list of additional passwords are easy to guess. And if I wanted to break into your account, not knowing anything about you, the very first thing I would do would be to try some of those passwords. And again, I wouldn't stop at 25. I'd try hundreds, maybe thousands. So obviously, if you use a common word, whether it's the word password or the word computer or the word baseball, that is really easily guessed. Any hacker worth their salt would immediately try things like that. Well, you might say, hey, I've heard that, of course, you have to include a number in your password, but you know what? Hackers know that too. So, of course, they're going to try adding numbers at the beginning, at the end, of the middle of all those common words. That doesn't really make your password significantly harder to guess. Another common thing that people will do is they'll take numbers that kind of look like letters, like an O, kind of looks like a 0, and number 3 kind of looks like backwards uppercase E, and so they'll replace letters with numbers that kind of look like them, thinking, oh, well, that will thwart the hackers. But you know what? Hackers invented this. That's not going to thwart anybody. Another thing that people commonly do is use patterns. Now, this happens to be a keyboard pattern. It's a very easy one to spot. There are other kinds of patterns using the keyboard or using other mechanisms that might seem to you to be less likely to be spotted. They're obviously easy to remember, easy to type, but believe me, hackers are smarter than that. They know about these things. You might choose for your password some a phrase. It might not even be an English phrase. It might be in Latin. It might be in Klingon. You know what? Hackers know about those too. They have dictionaries with lots of common quotes in them. Or you might choose the name of your spouse, your dog, your kids, or yourself. These are, of course, all things that if people know anything about you, they're trying to break into your account, they would certainly guess. But you're going to say, hey, I don't use any of those things. I don't use any of the top passwords. I don't use common words. I don't just add a number. I have a much, much better password that I'm pretty sure that nobody would ever guess. Well, I want to kind of address that nobody part, because you aren't just up against human people manually typing in words one after the other, trying to guess what your password might be. That happens on TV shows and in the movies, and it could occasionally happen in real life. But what you're really up against is machines. If somebody wants to break into your account specifically, or even not just you, they are just looking to break into anything they can to either cause havoc or vandalism, or get at, money, or steal your identity. They're going to use a much more sophisticated approach. So they're going to put their computer to work, and they're going to do what's called a brute force search. They're going to check every possible combination of passwords, like AAAA and AAAAA, and all the way every number of characters and every combination of characters that is possible, until they eventually get to your password. Now, it used to be that people would say, if your password is long enough or complex enough, you can resist brute force searches for long enough that the attacker would just give up. That's still kind of true, but the equipment and the software that hackers use to break passwords has gotten way, way, way better over the years. Now, this statistic here, it says time to crack any 8-character password, 5.5 hours. That's actually a few years old. It's probably quicker since then. Hackers love to get like a bunch of GPUs, put them in a box, and just set them. It's a kind of the same type of rig that you would use for mining Bitcoin. You just throw all kinds of processing power at it, and that sort of machine can run through every single combination of 8 characters in just hours. So if you have an 8-character password, no matter how terrific it appears to be, no matter how random, no matter what, it's not very safe. Now, adding 9 characters makes it much, much harder to crack. And if you go to 10 characters, that improves it a lot more. And I'll be talking about that in just a second. But I just wanted to make you aware that this kind of old idea that as long as my password is complex enough, it can still be really short is kind of faulty. Now, a lot of people have asked me, hey, wait a minute. When I go to some website and I type the wrong password by mistake, there's going to be a little delay, and then it'll say, okay, try again, and maybe the delay will be longer the next time. And after a few attempts, that website's going to lock me out. It's going to say, oh, no, you got to wait 24 hours, or oh, no, you got to go through some email procedure to reset your password or whatever. And so most systems, whether they're on the web or elsewhere, have these mechanisms built in to basically slow down people who are just randomly guessing your passwords. So if I'm saying, well, billions of passwords can be checked in a matter of minutes, how does that exactly work if we have these blocks in place? Well, most hackers don't go through the front door. They don't just load up a login form on a web page and have their computer fill in the form and submit and see if that worked, and if not, go on to the second password and so forth. They go through the back door, basically. So what usually happens is that some encrypted list of passwords gets out. Now, maybe there are different ways of doing this. Sometimes a whole database is encrypted. Most commonly, however, each individual password is encrypted, and sometimes both of those mechanisms are used. But the point is that if there has been some data breach and that list of encrypted passwords gets out and it's sitting on a hacker's computer, they don't have to go through that form on the web. They can just say, hey, computer, just try decrypting all these passwords over and over and over until you succeed. And so when they perform these offline attacks, they aren't constrained by these blocks that you would see if you were going through the front door. And in addition to that, when they are going through these brute force searches of offline lists of passwords, they aren't really going to check A first and then AA and then AAA and so forth. I mean, any responsible hacker is going to want to choose the most efficient path to success. So one of the first things they'll do is go through their list of commonly used passwords. Now, I showed you 25. They will go through millions of them. And again, they can do that in seconds or perhaps minutes. After going through the most commonly used passwords, they'll go through a dictionary, maybe a few dictionaries. It's really fast to do. They can go through all the English words, and then they'll go to, hey, let's try all the French words, all the Spanish words, all the Chinese words. Why not? We'll just go through one dictionary after another. They'll go through their lists of quotes, and once those have all been exhausted, they will start looking for common patterns. I mentioned like keyboard patterns, but also just sequences of letters and numbers and symbols that are easy to type and easy to remember. So even if it would take, in principle, centuries for a hacker with the most powerful cracking rig known to exist today to check every single possible password, it doesn't matter if yours happens to be one of the ones that is guessed earlier. How do you avoid having your password be guessed? Well, there's this concept called entropy, and I have a book about passwords that kind of gives you a mathematical formula for how this works, and I'm not going to worry about all the math right now, but basically entropy is a measure of complexity, or in terms of passwords, resistance to guessing. And to oversimplify a little bit, there are three ways you can add entropy to a password to make it harder to guess. One way is by expanding the character set. So if you have an ordinary English word like protagonist, that's going to be in a dictionary. It's going to be really easy for a computer to guess. If you add uppercase letters and digits and punctuation marks, now all of a sudden there are many more things that have to be checked in a brute force search. So the brute force search can't just check lowercase letters. It has to also check combinations that involve those additional character sets. That is going to slow it down quite a bit. So simply adding broader character set to your password will help a bit. A second thing that will help is making your password longer. Now, I say this with qualifications because even a very long word that happens to be in the dictionary is going to be very easily guessable. And there are some other gotchas here as well. But basically, if you have a short word like horse, that is going to be a lot easier for a computer to guess than a long phrase such as correct horse battery staple. Now, I use this one because there's a very famous XKCD comic from a number of years ago that's basically making the point that if your password is long enough, even though it might only consist of lowercase letters, and even though it might only consist of English words, the sheer length of the password adds entropy, and that makes it as secure as a shorter but much more complex password. Now, that's true as far as it goes, although I have actually done the math, and I'm here to tell you that a password consisting of 4 lowercase English words is really not quite safe enough these days. I would go for at least 5. 5 words, and I would make sure that those words are in fact randomly selected. Speaking of randomness, randomness is the third thing that can add entropy to your passwords. So, Ninja Boy, it might be a surprising password for you, but it's not really random. It's just 2 English words stuck together. On the other hand, this string of characters, which I just asked a computer to generate for me, is completely random. Now, this particular example doesn't include any punctuation. It doesn't include any digits. But because it wasn't generated in my head, it was generated by a computer, it's much harder to guess. It would slow down an attacker quite a bit. Now, I want to emphasize here that even if you try to create a random password out of your head, you are almost inevitably going to follow certain patterns that you might not even notice yourself, but that would be very easy for a computer to guess. You really want to use a true random number generator. You want to get your computer to generate random passwords for you. Now, it doesn't have to be a computer. You can generate a random password using dice. There are other random ways of selecting things, but you do want randomness. Now, I want you to just look over this slide and notice that any of these 3 things by themselves will make a password harder to guess. And you could, if you wanted, choose only one of these. I am going to have a fairly short password, but I'm going to use a wide character set. Or I'm going to use only lowercase letters, but I'm going to make it really, really long. Or I'm going to use a fairly short password, but make it completely random. Those are all true, but the more you mix up these things, the more unguessable your password becomes. Now, hold that thought, because we're going to come back to this concept of strong random passwords in a moment. I want to talk about the second big mistake that people use, which is reusing passwords. So even if you have the world's longest, most complex, most random password that is super resistant to any sort of hacking, if you use that same password on more than one site, you could be in trouble. Now, I just did a search yesterday to see some of the many companies who have suffered data breaches in the last few years. I'm sure that some of these names will be familiar to you. Well, there are hundreds more. This happens so often that it's almost not news anymore. You'll see an article like this. Oh yeah, Twitter had some data breach. Oops, 336 million people should really change their passwords. Now this was back in May, but this sort of thing happens all the time. It happens for different reasons. It happens because some employee left a laptop in the back of a cab and somebody picked up the laptop and looked at the stuff on it. It happens because somebody got fired and they were disgruntled and they decided to steal information on their way out. It happens because there was a bug in software someplace that somebody discovers. It happens because somebody malicious breaks into a network and exploits some vulnerabilities and steals database. Data leaks happen for all kinds of different reasons. But they happen, and they happen a lot, and you cannot avoid having them happen. So however great your passwords are, you have to realize that some of them could get out. So if you reuse a password, here's what's going to happen. One of these data breaches occurs. And that's terrible, but at this point, what has happened is that one of your passwords has gotten into the wrong hands. Now, let's say it's your Twitter password, your Facebook password. I don't know. Well, the attacker is going to break into that account for which they have discovered a password to verify that, yes, that password does really work. But most of the time, the attacker doesn't really care about getting into your Facebook account or your Twitter account. Now, if you're a celebrity, maybe they do care about that. If you're a politician, maybe they do care about that. If you're somebody like me, nobody cares. But that isn't why they're interested. They're interested because they know that there is a very common tendency for people to reuse the same password everywhere. So once they've verified that your password works, they're also going to try that in places that really matter. Yes, your Gmail account. Would you like somebody to have access to all of the email that you've ever sent or received? What about your PayPal account, Amazon, your bank account, any number of other places? Hackers really love places that involve money, of course, because money. But they also like places where they can get more data on you. And email accounts are a particularly attractive target because if you lose your password, forget your password, most sites have a password reset mechanism that involves clicking a link in an email message. But if the attacker has control of your email account, then they would get that password reset link, and that gives them the ability to reset passwords anywhere and get access to all your other accounts. So the moral of the story is don't use the same password in more than one place. If you have a password that is used in only one place and that place gets hacked, but you haven't used that password anyplace else, then you don't have to worry about anything else. You change that one password and you're done. This actually happened to me yesterday. I got an email, spam obviously, saying, oh, we know, Joe Kissell, that you have used the password thus and such. So therefore, pay us this ransom in Bitcoin and stuff. And I'm like, well, you know what? Let's look that up because all of my passwords are unique. And I looked up that password, and sure enough, it was a password that I had used once on a single website years and years ago. I never used it for anything else. And I just said, okay, great. There is no personal information about me at all on that particular website. And I really don't care that attackers have that password because that will get them nothing. They will not be able to use that password anyplace else. So I felt kind of smug, pat myself on the back. Great, I protected myself. Now, if I had used the same password everywhere else, I would have been in a great panic, because then not only would I have to change my password everywhere, but I would have no way to know which of those accounts might already have been compromised, what damage has been done, what information about me is leaked. So don't use the same password in more than one place. Well, that brings us to this matter of assuming that security and convenience are mutually exclusive. Well, I've just said that you really need to use strong passwords that are maybe longer or more random than you might otherwise would, and that however great your password is, you shouldn't use it in more than one place. Do I really have to pick? Well, to review, here's a great password. It's long, it's random, and it has all those different characters in it. It's a super password, but it's hard to come up with a random password like that just out of your head. It's really, really hard to remember that. It's a real pain to type. And I might add, if I have to do this, have a separate great password for every one of dozens or hundreds or thousands of accounts, then I'm definitely never going to be able to remember that. On the other hand, a nice, short, easy to remember and easy to type password is incredibly unsafe. So what's the strategy to deal with this problem? Well, my strategy has 3 simple steps. First of all, figure out which few passwords you really, really have to memorize. Now, when I first figured out this strategy, I think my list had 5 items in it. And today I believe I'm down to 3. There are a few passwords that you cannot possibly get away without memorizing, even if there's no technical reason that you have to memorize it, because you are going to use it a lot. There's sort of no avoiding memorizing it. But this should be a very short list. And I will tell you in just a moment how to come up with that list. Those few passwords, maybe it's 1 or 2, maybe it's 3 or 4, make those very few passwords super strong and commit them to memory. And for almost everything else, that's everything with a little orange asterisk, which I will get to in about 5 minutes, use a password manager. Now, your very important password list, your VIP list, should consist only of the passwords you have to enter frequently, or that you have to enter in a place that you can't use a password manager. For example, if you turn on your computer and you have it set up to require a password to log into it, which you should, of course you can turn that off, but you should have your computer set up to require a password so that if somebody steals it, they won't be able to get at your stuff. At that moment, you can't rely on anything other than your fingers on a keyboard to enter that password for you. So that would be an example of a password that you would have to memorize. Now, of course, there are technologies like cameras that'll look at your face and fingerprint recognition that will give you an alternative means of entering a password. That's great. Those are handy. I use them too, but they don't always work. There are situations in which you will still need to enter a password. And so for logging into your device, you'll still need to memorize that password. You might also need to memorize a password for your password manager and for certain other accounts that you access frequently. But again, we're not talking about a long list. We're not talking about a dozen. If you can't count them on one hand, that's probably too many. So you come up with your list. Maybe it's my login password for my computer. Maybe I have more than one device I need to memorize login passwords for. Maybe it's the master password for my password manager. Maybe it's a couple of other accounts. And you create incredibly great passwords for just those few, and you sit down and memorize them, and you can do it. You've memorized your phone number, your address, your social security number. It's not that big of a deal to memorize 3 or 4 super strong passwords. So that's step 1. You have your very important password list that you have memorized. For almost everything else, and again, I will be telling you about some exceptions, you use a password manager. Now, If you go to the internet and search for password manager, you might find something like this. This is not what I'm talking about. It's a book, okay? You can write down passwords on sticky notes too, but that's not what I mean by a password manager. I'm talking about an app. I'm talking about an app that you can use on your computer, on your smartphone, on your tablet, on whatever. Now, password manager apps have, there are many of them. They differ somewhat in their capabilities, but some of the features that all of the good ones have are, number one, an automatic random password generator. So you can just say, hey, give me a password that has whatever, 18 characters, 50 characters, however many you want. Make sure it includes uppercase letters and digits and punctuation. You just say go and it goes. Sometimes it just takes a click or two or a keystroke or two to generate a new random password when you need one. Secondly, it saves web forms as you log in. So I've gone to a new site. It says, all right, enter your email address. Great, did that. Come up with a new password. Oh, and repeat it too. No problem. I'm going to have my password manager generate a random password for me and fill it into both of those places. Now you click submit and your password manager will say, oh, hey, would you like me to just remember this for you? And you say, well, of course I would. And it's that easy. It saves that stuff for you. Then the next time you go back to that website, you click a button or you press a keyboard combination and it'll autofill that information for you. So I've done this hundreds of times, and most of my passwords I have literally never seen. Somebody could put a gun to my head. I couldn't tell you what the password is because I literally don't know. I've never seen it. I had a random password generator create it for me and fill it in and remember it. And every time I go to that site, it fills in the password for me. A good password manager will also securely sync this data with all your devices. Do you have a bunch of PCs? Do you have a phone? Do you have a tablet? Do you have a Mac? Do you have anything? Do you have a bunch of devices that all need to access the same passwords? There are many ways of syncing them across all of them. Now, I have extensively researched and tested password managers. I have looked at over 30 different apps, most of which work on a whole bunch of different platforms. I have spent countless hours on this. I'm going to give you one example to start with that I will just walk you through briefly. This is the one that I happen to like best. And again, this is not just sort of an emotional thing. Well, oh, I like this. I've used it for years. No, this is actually the best according to my objective and detailed testing. It's an app called 1Password. Now, 1Password exists on Windows and Mac OS and iOS and Android. There is a Chrome extension that will work on a Chromebook or in Linux. You can use this on just about any platform you want. It is a paid app. There are free password managers, and that's certainly an option for you, although the free apps don't have as many features or as great security or as fantastic ease of use as some of the paid ones, but it's not expensive. The name 1Password suggests exactly what it means. You only have to remember one password, and that is the password that will unlock your password manager. And once it's unlocked, then you don't have to type or remember or think about any other passwords. So of course, you want that 1Password to be a really good one. You want it to be on your VIP list. Now, even though I'm using this particular password manager as an example, it's the same thing is true of any of dozens of other ones. The model is you use a single great password to protect all your other passwords. So you'll open the app, you'll enter it there, and hey, there you have access to all your stuff. Now I just threw some demo data in here. You'll see I've got 45 items stored. This isn't my real data. My real data contains a couple thousand items, but for each item that you enter, it could be a website, it could be just a standalone password, it could be a software license, it could be a secure note. This app will store the username, the password, the website it goes with, and a bunch of other stuff. It'll let you organize them. It will let you discover when a password might need to be changed, and a bunch of other stuff. So let's say you go to a website. I have eBay here as an example, and you open up your website in your favorite browser, and it's saying, oh yeah, I'm going to need you to enter your email address or username and your password. How do you do it? Now, each password manager has a slightly different way of doing this. You could click the little icon to the right of the address bar to open up the password manager, but the simplest way is to just use a keyboard shortcut. Now, the default one in 1Password is Control \. If you don't like that, hey, great, change it to something else. But when you press Control \, it will fill in your username and password. And if you like, it'll also sort of virtually click the sign in button for you. So conceivably, with one keyboard combination, it will fill in and submit your username and password, and that's all you need to do. There are reasons that you might not want it to submit automatically, but it can if you want to. Now, suppose you have more than one account for a different site. So again, using eBay as an example, maybe I have a personal account and a work account, or two different personal accounts. What would happen in that case is you would press that keyboard combination, and instead of automatically filling a password, it would pop up a little window saying, oh yeah, I've got a couple of accounts that match this website. Why don't you just either click on the one you want or use the keyboard to select the one you want, press return, and I'll fill that one in for you. And this little pop-up interface here, which is called 1Password Mini, can be accessed anywhere on your machine. You don't even have to have a web browser running, but this little window gives you an easy way to see your passwords, to fill them in, to generate new passwords, to fill in credit card information, and all kinds of other stuff. Now, 1Password is great for memorizing and filling in and syncing your passwords, but it does a lot of other stuff too. As I mentioned, it can generate strong passwords, and it can do this whether or not you happen to be on a web page that's asking you for one. It can memorize stuff as you go to a site. You've entered your existing credentials, and it will learn them automatically. Syncs across. It works, it works on pretty much any browser and platform you might want. Do you want to use Chrome on Windows 10? Great, it works there. Do you want to use Safari on a Mac? Great, it works there. Do you want to use Firefox on an Android phone? No problem, it works there as well. It has a series of features it calls Watchtower, which identifies different kinds of passwords that you might want to change. For example, passwords that are just really short or really weak in some other way. It also identifies passwords that 1Password knows have been involved in one of these security breaches. So if your password has appeared on one of these leaked lists, it will tell you about those and tell you to change it. And you can store secure notes, you can store software licenses, and all kinds of other stuff. Now, I mentioned 1Password because, in my professional judgment, it's the best, but it's not the only one. There are lots of others. There's one called LastPass, which you can get at lastpass.com. There's a free version of this, which is really good. It's not as good as the paid version, and it's not as good as 1Password. But if price is a huge issue for you and you just need a way to get started with password managers without spending any money, LastPass is a really strong contender. There's also one called Dashlane and one called RoboForm, and all of these work across pretty much any platform. If you are a Mac user or an iOS user, Apple has a password manager that's built in called iCloud Keychain. It's, it's okay. It's not great. I would recommend using something else at least to supplement it, but it kind of gets the job done. And as I say, there are dozens and dozens of others. Now, earlier, I showed you an orange asterisk that said, yeah, use your password manager for everything else except, well, there are places where your password manager won't work. If you're filling in your Netflix password on a smart TV, yeah, I can't use your password manager there. There are some websites that are specially designed to thwart password managers, and those are awful, but they exist. If you have to type in a code on a physical pad, or if you have to give your password to somebody over the phone, password manager won't help you there, except to the extent that you can call up the password you need on your phone and read it off or retype it. So it's not a perfect solution, but it is a really good one. In addition to using a password manager, I mentioned that you should make your master password extra strong. And although you normally should not write down your passwords, you should make sure that at least somebody else has access to your account and your master passwords in case of emergency. What if you die? What if you're in the hospital and your spouse needs to get access to your your insurance account or your bank account or something in an emergency? You should make sure that at least someone has a way to get at that stuff. Be careful with security questions like what was your mother's maiden name? I'll say a few words about that in a moment, and use two-factor authentication when you can, which I will also talk about momentarily. You know, these security questions, like what was your mother's maiden name, are meant to help you if you forget your password. Give the site a way to help you remember, help you recover your password. But if you tell the truth, then you're also helping out an attacker. Anybody can figure out my mother's maiden name or the name of my pet. That's not really secret. So when you are asked to supply security questions and answers, don't tell the truth, please. Respond if you need to, but not with the correct answer, because that makes it less secure. Where should you store your lie so that you don't forget it when you're called upon later? Well, put it in your password manager. That way it's safe. In some cases, when you use two-factor authentication, that removes the need to answer these security questions at all. Now, two-factor authentication refers to not just the thing you know, which is your password, but another kind of thing, a thing that you have, like a physical object, or a thing that you are, like your iris pattern, or your fingerprint, or the shape of your hand. So when you combine a thing that you know with a thing that you are or a thing that you have, now you have two factors. So even if somebody did steal your password or guessed it, that's not all they would need to log into your account. So there are one of the most common forms of two-factor authentication is TOTP. That stands for time-based one-time password. That's when you use either an app or a physical device to generate a 6-digit code that changes every 30 seconds. This is a very, very common form of two-factor authentication. There are also little pieces of hardware, such as a YubiKey. This is what it looks like, a little larger than actual size, just a little USB thing, and you plug that in and you click the button, and that the fact that you require this physical object that you have to authenticate an account serves as a second factor. And there are a bunch of other things like this. And as I say, there's also biometrics, fingerprints, and the like. So basically, if a site offers you the opportunity to use more than one factor, you should use it. And that will make you that much more secure, even if your password is stolen. 1Password has a really great feature that it will generate these one-time passwords for you without having to go to a separate app. And it kind of works like this. You go to a website, you press your keyboard shortcut to fill in your stuff, and then another page comes up and it says, okay, now I'm going to need your one-time password. But 1Password has already generated it, has already put it on the clipboard. You can press Control-V, paste it right in, and you're good to go. Now, I have sped through what is really the subject of 2 or 3 different books that I've written. And if you'd like to learn more, I'd like to invite you to check out the books, and I'm even offering a 30% discount. So this is a book called Take Control of Your Passwords. It's now in its 3rd edition. It expands on everything I talked about just now. It's normally $15. You can have it for $10.50 if you use that URL at the bottom. Use that URL and put the book in your cart. And once you click checkout, the discount will automatically be applied. And of course, you'll be able to download this presentation to get at that URL again. If you happen to choose 1Password as opposed to LastPass or something else, I have a whole book on that as well. It was just updated a couple of days ago to the 4th edition, and that gives you detailed information on getting up to speed and using its power features. And finally, I want to just mention Take Control of Your Digital Legacy, which is a book I wrote for people that want to figure out how to deal with not just their passwords, but all their digital data when they die. How do you make sure that all and only the right kinds of information get passed on? And the things happen to your digital data that you want to have happen, whatever that might be. And I have a whole book on that topic as well. So if you are interested in learning any more about any of these topics, I would encourage you to go pick up these books. They're inexpensive. They are ebooks that you can read on any platform, and I think you'll find them helpful. So at this time, we have about 3 or 4 minutes left, and I'll be very happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Oh, good. We have a few up here. Question, if I use Password Manager to change router passwords, and I need to use that password for change to my TiVo, how do I obtain the password?
So in general, when you go into a password manager and say, hey, make me a new password, it will make you a new password and it will remember it. Now, depending on the environment, you might have to actually give that password a name. So if you're changing your password for your router and you don't happen to be logged into a web interface where it can memorize that particular IP address, you might have to say, just give it a label, like this is my router, my new router password. Now, when you then go to your TiVo, this is one of those examples that I said a password manager can't automatically fill in a password everywhere. What I would do is I would go ahead and change my router password on my computer. My new password will sync to my phone, and I will take my phone into the living room. I turn on my TiVo. I go to the screen where I gotta enter my new Wi-Fi password, and I just look at the password on my phone and type it in with the TiVo. Now, if you have some kinds of streaming devices let you actually copy and paste from a smartphone or a tablet into the interface. I don't think there's a way to do that with a TiVo, but even though you are going to have to go through that manual step of looking at the password and typing it in, you should only have to do that once.
Okay, I'm trying to read one that just came through and it's like 4 lines. I have been using LastPass for about 8 years and rely on that, but I may have to use TFA. Once I do that, Apple won't let me go back. There are many different kinds. Google Authentication, LastPass has it built into its app. There's also Microsoft Authenticator, Transcat, Duo Security, and others. I've Googled this, but there are no comparisons or shortcuts or shootouts. How do I find out the features of each to evaluate them? Have you evaluated some of them?
The complete answer to this will take longer than we have, but the short answer is that if you are using any kind of system that generates those 6-digit one-time password codes, any app that you might use to generate those codes is going to be equivalent. You can use Google Authenticator, you can use Authy, you can use 1Password, you can use Dashlane. There's a whole bunch of different apps. There's even one made by LastPass that does this. So they're all going to give you the same code. The only difference is going to be how easy do they make it for you to enter that. And that's one area in which 1Password does an exceptional job. As soon as you've filled in a username and password, it'll automatically put that current code for that 30-second range on your clipboard. So to the extent that a two-factor authentication system uses a one-time password, the only real difference between the different ways to enter them is how easy they make it, and in that respect, I would recommend 1Password.
Okay, we're going to end up on one last question, and that is, haven't certain password managers been hacked?
That also is a kind of long thing. Now, LastPass has had some security breaches. And according to the company, although some data did leak, it was all encrypted. So there is always a risk of, we're talking about computers here, okay? Things can go wrong. And data can leak out either because of a bug or on purpose. There is no absolutely perfect mechanism to protect everything from anyone from all time. I have studied the publicly available information on the LastPass leaks, and what I can tell you is that they might have included some usernames, they might have included some encrypted passwords, but the company was very, very good about finding these things and shutting them down very quickly, sealing the security holes. And as far as anyone outside the company knows, no actual passwords were leaked. So it is a risk, but having each password be unique and strong and separately encrypted will really minimize that risk.
Okay, I'll take it back and do one more, because this is one that I know in the pass manager that I use. Somebody uses KeePass, and there's, like you said, there's a list of other ones.
Yeah.
If they want to switch to 1Pass, is there an easy export import for 1Pass?
Yeah, so 1Password can definitely import passwords from other managers. It has a built-in way to, it can import like a, comma delimited or tab delimited file. If you have it in plain text, it can import directly from LastPass or I think Splash ID Safe. I don't know off the top of my head what formats KeePass can export passwords in, but if it can export passwords in a comma or tab delimited format, which most of them can, then yes, absolutely, 1Password can import that. A lot of people use KeePass. It's an open source password manager. It's okay. It is not nearly as good as the other ones that I've mentioned in terms of usability or inconsistency across platforms. But let me just say, I would rather you use any password manager than none at all.
Right.
Even if it's one that I really hate personally, that is 1,000 times better than not using anything. So if that's what you like, then, be my guest.